bridge and stuff. They had like a family that jumped off the bridge. Everybody floating around and stuff. I felt creepy because it was like, come see, and I went over there and to look, and they had a man got shot, and his brains was on the ground and stuff. It was creepy, real creepy. My family didn't come back because they didn't have any relatives. They planned on coming back when they find the house. I feel sad because I lost my house and all my clothes in my car when my mom was gone. I was staying in Kentucky Street, right down the street from the lady. We stayed at my grandpa's house with my cousins because my mama didn't want to leave my uncle Adam and my uncle Adam and I leave my grandpa, and my grandpa didn't want to go. We had a portable, you know how the stores with the portable kind? It was something like that, and we had cooked like something, and that's what we all ate, and we went to sleep, and my uncle Adam, he was saying, y'all don't worry about it, when y'all wake up in the morning, all the water gonna be gone. So we woke up in the morning and the water was still there. After that, we went on St. Clair, and from St. Clair we went to the convention center. That was horrible. Everybody in here was shots every night. You couldn't do nothing about it, but just sit there. Because you know what else you could do? I felt miserable. And my mama, she had got sunburned bad, so she was fussing all day long. We said,
Okay. Um, so, what did you hear? Oh, what did you hear as far as the symptoms? What symptoms did you kind of recognize in those kids based on the ones that we had talked about? Okay, incongruent affect, like that. The kids talking about which part? Yeah. Okay, so that kind of that nonchalant, he's smiling and yet talking about what happened with the deaths and stuff. All right. What else did you notice? Maybe some of that just sleeplessness and such. Let's see. So anyway, you kind of heard it in their own words, and so going back to the kind of the range of responses we talked about, post-traumatic stress disorder is remember you have to have these here we go right here. These are the this is the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. Re-experiencing through intrusive thoughts, avoidance, hyperarousal, and more than 1 month. Having these symptoms more than 1 month. That's the diagnosis criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. And 24 to 39% of kids after a natural disaster will meet post-traumatic stress disorder criteria. So predicting reactions to disaster. So which kids are going to have post-traumatic stress disorder? A lot of it depends on, the main part is exposure to the disaster. So kids that are closer to the disaster and more direct exposure have more risk. Interpersonally, if it was interpersonal and social context, in other words, if they were away from their family during the disaster, it's harder on the kids. But this is good. Disaster plan and relief efforts can really make a big difference for kids. And this is kind of a model of predicting reactions to disaster. It depends on the characteristics of the disaster, how severe was it, exposure, etc. So you can look at those parts. So the circles of physical vulnerability, if they were a direct victim, like they got hurt, broke their arm or something like that, or if there was a near miss, those kids will have more likelihood of getting PTSD. For social vulnerability, if they were close to a victim, like if it was their relative or something, it's more likely. Or if it's less likely, but if they identify with the victim. So you might say somebody was, say, in Tampa, but they go, but I was from New Orleans. Those kids are identifying with the victim. They said, well, that there'll be more of a risk there. Kids with prior experiences of trauma will have more severe trauma response. So if they had a similar trauma in the past, it's worse on them. Now, this is interesting because a lot of people say, oh, well, if they experienced a trauma in the past, then maybe they developed some resiliency skills, and so maybe they'll do better. Well, yeah, maybe they did develop some resiliency skills, but the research consistently shows that if there was a prior trauma in their past that was similar to that, it's actually worse for those kids. Now, I think this is important, too, because even if there was any type of loss, so if you think about this, kids who are in foster care are one of the more vulnerable populations during a hurricane or any other natural disaster that occurs. Those are the kids you really want to look out for. And then kids that are aware of the events around them, like 6 to 11-year-olds, those are the younger kids, they're also at risk. The social supports, if they have a lot of family support, that's good for them. And even outside agencies like Red Cross and FEMA, that can predict them doing a little bit better. So there's a resiliency model that shows that there are certain protective factors for kids where they can resist the risk and react in a positive way. I think this is interesting. Their humor. So getting the kids to laugh and kind of be lighthearted will be helpful. Family qualities, if they're caring and warm, and then outside support, teachers, church, work, etc., that will help. So I just want to show you this. This is a destruction of a Hindu temple after the tsunami in Sri Lanka. It used to be all built up and stuff, but that's what's left. But what was interesting to me, right next to it, somebody had found this little elephant god and put out a brick, and they put incense on it. So to me, it kind of spoke to the fact that people will still find a way to worship. There's that sense of spirit within people, like you were saying before. It's that they survive, and this is one of the ways they were surviving. I'd also met this man and his boy. His wife and his mother died during the tsunami. She drowned. But they wanted to come and talk to us, and they were lifting up these coconuts, kind of as if to say, hey, we're still strong. Even though this happened, we're still strong, and we're going to make it. So I think it's important to always look for resiliency within people and see that, children can comfort each other. You'll see that natural thing, and you always want to kind of point that out for them. So now just real quick, we'll look at some interventions for different phases. Pre-incident phase, which actually we're in right now. We're pre-incident, waiting for a hurricane to happen. We're trying to improve our coping through psychoeducation. And then at the impact phase and rescue phase, these are 0 to basically 1 week after, you're going to do a psychological first aid. How many of you have heard of psychological first aid before? Anybody? Nope. All right. Psychological first aid, you can actually download the Psychological First Aid Field Operations Manual from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And it's just www.nctsn.org. So it's www.nctsn.org.